Hey, when I'm out there.
Hey, Jody.
It's amazing. Level changes. I walked
We'll
out.
continue painting your house.
I woke up that March 10th.
About 15 years ago, it was.
Yeah, it's,
They said it needs it again. Thanks for the reminder. Don't forget the sander. Next time I see her, shouldn't have made that work yet.
Not really.
Wind her up and we.
Oh, right. We went the next day.
yeah, so what happened was.
Yeah.
They have a production meeting at 9, so 9:30, I'll send that invite.
Okay, great.
All right.
Yeah, that works. TJ was out there.
Yeah, he said like
Had
they
it
were
rained real heavy,
Yeah.
and they tore it up in a second.
Good. Yeah.
Get a lot of rain on this stuff.
The sweat was dry this morning, like.
Isn't that crazy?
The lamp put a little nice little skip in there.
Well, I asked.
I asked Dave one time if he could block off the drain and build a nice pond.
This is
He said, I don't have a problem. But
Yeah,
you can
because
park
when
right
the
there.
first-
It's for-
Oh my gosh, that's horrible. You know, that's hard enough to get a used car right now, because there's plenty of time. Yeah.
Or a new car.
Yeah.
A new car, yeah.
It was just a bit.
All right, it's 8 o'clock, why don't we get the,
Oh, well, I'll have to make mental notes.
finance admin committee.
Mental doesn't work so good. It's too
rolling.
low anymore.
We have, John Galvin,
Oh, I mean,
that's
that's-
out of here.
He's better be fine.
We have a call order.
Thank you, sir, look at that.
Keith Fair,
Here.
Tom Moore,
He's always prepared.
John Gallen will be absent, Steve Brunner,
Here.
and Greg Porter.
Greg. Are you
Yes.
here?
Here. Hello.
Any public comment related to the Finance and Administration Committee? No? Hearing none, moving on. In order to save some time for our police chief, I'd like to move item number 11, the police department 5-year vehicle replacement plan, up on the agenda. Does anybody have any issues with that? Okay, John, you got it?
All right. So I was asked, I guess, fire and police to come up with a 5-year plan for police vehicles. So I submitted this plan to fire and police at the last meeting, and in the very beginning, I have the executive summary of what the total cost that I'm estimating them to be. It's hard to know the exact cost because I don't know what the vehicles are going to cost over the 5 years. There are increases, and as body types change for the vehicles, there's sometimes that we are not able to reuse some of the equipment, like the cages inside, the light bars that just aren't the right size anymore. So that kind of dictates what some of the costs would be at the time. But at the beginning, I just have it as an executive summary, as you can see, 5 years, what I'm estimating the cost to be. Next year, 2022, at the 144,000 and change. 23, 83,000, almost 84,000 actually. 2024, 117. 2025, 118, and 2026, 107. Next year is higher because I'm asking for 3 different vehicles. One of the things that's happening is our criminal investigating, those vehicles, as you go through the report, I have all of our vehicles listed. They are our older vehicles, so they are the ones now that we haven't changed those out for a while, so they're gonna have to start being changed out. So that's adding extra vehicles out. I have it broken down by years as we go through. Sort of the estimated cost section, how I determined that. A couple of things. I'm looking to replace cars 1, 5, and 8. Car 1 is our black Charger. It's one of the older cars. It's starting to show, it's starting to nickel and dime us really. And it's one that has still the hail damage from 2014. It's showing that. So Jake's been putting a lot of work into it lately with the engine. So I'm looking to replace that. I'm looking to change all these vehicles out primarily with the Ford utility vehicle. The three options that we really have are Chevy, Dodge, and Ford. Ford has the most options in that they have two basically that are police package. One's a pickup truck, one's a utility. Chargers are for Dodge, and then they have a Durango. I've done some checking on the Durango with some departments that have it. They have a lot of maintenance issues with those. We're seeing it with our Chargers, so I'm looking to stay away from the Dodge models. The Chevy has a pickup and they have the Tahoe. The Tahoe would be a preferred vehicle for our supervisor vehicle, but it's larger, but it's also pursuit rated. The Expeditions that we currently have are not pursuit rated vehicles, but we have them because they're large vehicles. So that was supposed to be the vehicle that we got in 2021 to replace our supervisor vehicle. But the problem is with Chevy right now, they're having issues with some chips, and we could not get any deliveries in Tahoes in 2021. And I honestly don't know what that is going to be in 2022. It may still be that issue. So as you read through this, I have in there some, I'm basing it on Tahoe's cost when I'm looking at the larger vehicle, but the Fords tend to be the standard now for police in our country. That they have a nice package, and those vehicles are working pretty well for us. So as you go through it in 2022, like I said, I'm replacing car 1 with a Ford utility, just an unmarked. Car 5, which is being used right now as a supervisor vehicle, so that would be a larger vehicle, and then car 8, which is a marked vehicle. There are some additional costs with 5 having one of our LPRs, so that's going to have to be fixed out as well. And we're getting the cameras in our marked vehicles as well. So those are going to have to be switched out. So for car 1, total replacement value is, I'm estimating at $39,907.35. For car 5, $53,562.62, because again, that's going to be a Tahoe. And car 8 at $48,369.72. The LPRs to be switched over, and in-car cameras. That's how I come up with that cost of $144,089.69.
So John, none of this is going to be worth this year anyway. So my suggestion would be, as opposed to just approving this as it is, I think it's a good report, I think it's thorough, I think it's exactly what we need as a long-range plan. But I think what we need to do is take the full numbers and throw them into the budget when we have budget discussions and approve it as part of the budget to see how that all falls out before we make any decisions. I mean, I think it's a good report, I think it's thorough, it's probably what we need to do, but I think we got to see the big picture numbers before you can make any of those decisions. So my suggestion would be to make a motion to move it to put in the budget and see how it shakes out.
As I'm preparing the budget, that's what I'm putting in.
Well, this is the time of year, I mean, this is, you
Right.
know, now you got close to $600,000 worth of vehicles here, that's a lot of money.
Yep. That's why I said let's just put it in and see how it all shakes out. You know.
I can donate my 2004 F-150 pickup. It's rusty.
Yeah.
No one would ever suspect you sitting there and observing anyone in that thing.
So, I mean, if anybody has any questions regarding, I know you guys have a lot to go through, you all have the plan, and assuming you've read it, I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have. hopefully that it kind of self-explanatory speaks for itself as to how I got the numbers and how I'm justifying why I would do this.
Seems like we have a lot of cars out there, but also seems like we might be.
They're used, I mean, we'll see probably later on today, the lot's gonna be empty. Not gonna be anybody around, you know.
All right, so we need to make a motion to move the 5-year plan for the police department fleet to, just to move it towards, for the budget, we have to make a motion for
No,
that.
because you're gonna approve the
Right.
final number's gonna come from whatever it is approved in the final budget.
Submit it, part of your budget, we'll go from there. Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on.
Somebody on it, so,
Perfect. Phyllis, do you want to start out with, back to number 4, the cash update? It's long enough I can't afford it to myself.
There we go. All right, at the end of August, cash and investments totaled $11,686,000. That's a decrease from the end of July of $909,000. Similar decreases are expected over the remainder of the year, whereas most of our larger revenue categories are significantly received, and we've yet to expend on our capital projects that are planned. So you can expect to see decreases follow in the subsequent months. Interest rates remain unchanged, with the VIST ICS, now known as the Intra-Fi Network Deposits, is the best bet for the deposits at 0.1%. So 6,446,000 is sitting in those accounts. The CDs have been renewed, the 6-month CD and the 12-month CD now mature on February 5th of 2022. At the end of August, there was just one pending reimbursement from DCAD for borrower's application number 9 in the amount of $517,000. A partial reimbursement was received actually on September 1st, and we'll look closer at where we stand on that project. Any questions on the cash balances? All right, moving on. Okay. For the month of August, expenditures exceeded revenue by $1,178,000, bringing the year-to-date total to $2,617,000. When added to the beginning of the year fund balance, the fund balance at the end of August, the overall balance totaled $12,117,000. $1,341,000 is reserved for future commitments, leaving an unreserved fund balance of $10,775,000. With the receipt of that pending reimbursement, that would bring the unreserved fund balance on September 1st to $11,292,000. We look at the detail of what is reserved. We started the month with reserves totaling $1,383,000. During the month of August, an additional month of the MS4 commitment was added, bringing that total to $293,000. Also in the month of August, additional expenses were identified relative to the Berkshire Heights Bullards project. When the Home Depot invoice came in, there's always a month lag there. So that small amount of $382 was reduced from the budgeted items. Also paid during the month of August was another chunk of the planning for the Public Works Garage to McCarthy Engineering. That project is now 90% paid, leaving a balance of $16,300. So total reserves at the end of August total $1,341,000. Now, as I report this activity to the reserve accounts, the question arose as to what process we wanna go through as we identify during the budget process, items that we budgeted for during 2021, but timing is gonna dictate that those items fall into 2022. Those projects would include, for example, the library AC, which I think Pat will be talking about shortly, the pedestrian bridge, library roof, the multimodal stormwater projects. So as we become aware that projects budgeted for the current year are not gonna come off as planned and are gonna fall into the following year, what process do you wanna follow to add those to reserves? First, do you recommend that they not be added to the committee acts upon them? Or should I be adding them as I learn the timing of the
I
projects?
think the committee should approve the inclusion of reserve funds.
Okay.
But they should be moved to the reserve, not part of the cash balance for next year or into the budget, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if you reflect in the budget those reserves.
Reserves are not budgetary items. It's just a designation of the existing fund balance. So the same items will require rebudgeting for next year and will cause a positive variance in this year because a budgeted item was not expended.
Okay.
So we're looking for a committee action to actually move those items to reserve.
I move that they be, that those budgeted line items that will not be expended for this year be reserved. Second.
Okay.
Okay.
All in favor? Aye.
If
Any
we look
opposed?
specifically at the pedestrian bridge, the line item that had been budgeted was, park improvements. And the amount budgeted was $250,000. Other items have been incurred during the current calendar year, which were charged to that account. For example, the repair to the pedestrian bridge between construction masters and the additional stone purchase, that was, almost $25,000. The Stonehouse master plan likewise, we thought was gonna be billed during 2020. A large part of it fell to 2021. That total to date is, about $17,000. The purchase of the duck pound fountain was likewise put in there, and that's gonna be about $4,500. So the actual balance of remaining is not $250, it's actually more like $200.
We're anticipating getting a grant so that the pedestrian bridge dollars, $200,000 that's reserved for it currently can actually, that's budgeted for it, can actually be used for something else because we're anticipating
Not
grant money.
not entirely accurate because the grant that's funding the replacement of that bridge has a 30% match, which between that and the other project is gonna equal more than $250,000.
Okay.
And when we budget, we're required to budget the grant proceeds as a revenue.
Right.
And the expense, the construction costs as a budget line. So at this time, with 200 remaining, is the committee looking for 200 to be placed in reserve? Or for the full 250 to be placed in reserve?
I was just saying, I think you want to
With
put
the
it in the
200?
balance of what's remaining. yeah.
Okay. So for September, I will reflect
Go with that.
a reserve for the pedestrian bridge of 200,000. There's further discussion on the library AC. I don't know that we have a firm estimate for the roof. The roof for the library was actually not included in the budget. That was an item that we were waiting for grant award to be added before those items were considered for the current year. So that required us to revisit that topic. Let's see, the multimodal stormwater projects, we have budgeted, 530,000, none of which will be expended this year, correct?
Correct. Those multimodal stormwater projects, the Peg Bridge money is coming out of that, as well as when Jim and I sat down with PennDOT roughly a month ago, the scope to do the 3 projects would have far exceeded the grant money plus the required match. So we've scaled it back to just the Peg Bridge replacement at the Stonehouse and then the Cambridge Avenue culvert. but effectively fixing the culvert to help with some stormwater issues. We were going to do, repairs to the retention ponds at Berkshire and Paper Mill as well, but PennDOT wanted us to own those ponds as well as take right of way for their money to fund that project, and since multiple sinkholes have opened up within those retention ponds, we wanted no part of that.
So, my question remains of the multimodal 530 that was budgeted, are we looking to reserve that full amount for 2022?
Of that, we expect to be spending that all up.
Not the whole amount, I mean, our match is gonna be roughly around 280 to 300,000.
I would suggest you reserve the amount that we think we're gonna need to match.
I would shoot on the high side and go with 300.
So, we have to, like, I assume we'll just budget what we think the match will be. Right? Is that not the question you're asking, Phyllis?
Yeah, I think I'll get together with Michelle and finalize that number, because, what we're reserving here is either revenue that is, receipts that have yet to be spent,
Right.
or expenses that have yet to be incurred.
Gotcha, so you need the grant amount plus the match.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're
Okay, you
looking
need
more like
that on
eight,
the revenue side, Steve.
Yeah.
which would be 825,000.
Right, on the revenue side, see, match up.
We'll finalize those.
So the net number would be what we have to pay out, but. Okay.
Which would be reserved for business in the budget replacement.
Right. Okay.
All right, if we look at the actual August results, revenues for the month of August total 766,000, pretty much on par with 2019. Brings year-to-date revenues to 50,988,000. Now those numbers do include the unusual receipts of the American Recovery Plan money of 556,000, as well as the Equus transfer tax of 341,000. Without those two unusual receipts, the year-to-date revenues would still be 15,089,000, or about 75% of the budgeted revenue. So, the revenues are still well in excess of our expenditures. Capital expenditures, you will see when we review that section, there's a number of applications that will be approved and paid over the months of September and October. Expenditures for the month of August total 1,944,000, bringing year-to-date expenditures to 13,370,000, or just 61% of what's been budgeted thus far. On a net basis, for the month of August, as I reported with the cash, for the month of August, the expenditures exceeded revenue by the amount of 1,178,000, bringing the year-to-date total to a positive 2,617,000. The only unusual transaction during the month of August was the payment of Barlow's application number 9 in the amount of 517,000, and that was the amount that was received on September 1st. So that was reimbursed shortly thereafter.
We received the whole 517 on September 1st.
No, we did actually. We're at a point in the grant where we're capped. Receipts, including the September receipt, would bring the total to 1,800,000. The remainder of the cost, they hold back 10% until the project is complete. And then all final costs will be reimbursed in one shot. So with the partial receipt on September 1st, total reimbursement is 1,000,008. And the balance will come with one final reimbursement.
So we expect that reimbursement this year.
Yes.
Yes.
I talked to Jim yesterday, he just received payouts 10 and 11, which total about 90,000.
Yeah, I have the detail.
Okay.
All right, so if you look at real estate taxes, tax collector reports collections in the month of August of just $6,000. That's to be expected. The flat period ended at the end of June. We're now in the penalty period. So taxpayers who have not made their payments are more likely to wait until December now because there's a penalty that applies that entire period. So it's a $6,000 collected during August, plus another $4,900 that was July collections that the borough received in the beginning of August. The borough's total collections for the month of August were $10,900. And that brings us to about 4% not collected, which is pretty much on par with where we were in 2019, when the due dates were the same. So that 10,000, plus the collection of delinquent taxes that were received from the county in the amount of $1,800 and interest in the amount of $1,000. Total receipts for the month of August for real estate taxes were $13,900, bringing year-to-date real estate tax collections to $4,426,000, or actually 99% of what we had budgeted. The one variance that will persist throughout the rest of the year is the interim tax. 2020 was very unusual, and that was when all the reassessments occurred for the Equus properties that were occupied. So that was really unusual for 2020. We will still be low when compared to 2019. The borough was informed in a letter from the county treasurer that was dated in August 11th, that the same problems that the local tax collectors experience with the new county software, the county is also experiencing, and they have delayed billing for any additional interim changes to 2022. So what we see in collections for interim taxes of 2005-16, that's it. That's all we're going to get for the year. Any additional billing is being deferred by the county in 2022. So not much we can do about that. Any questions on real estate taxes? Okay, moving on. We look at other local taxes. During the month of August, collections totaled $283,000, bringing year-to-date collections to $4,184,000. Keep in mind that does include the transfer tax from the Equus properties. Even without that Equus transfer tax, local taxes would total $3,843,000. So we are at about 89% of what we had budgeted. The two taxes that we are paying particular attention to include the mercantile tax. For the month of August, mercantile tax was only $4,300. Year-to-date total of $1,097,000. It was a little bit smaller. See the whole thing. There we go. So we had to collect 98% of what we had budgeted. What we're seeing when we look at the Wyomissing total, we had budgeted $225,000, which was an increase over what we had budgeted from 2020. We anticipated economic growth as a result of Wawa and those other businesses in that area, but we had no way to quantify that. So the excess that we're seeing in the Wyomissing portion is attributed to that economic development. What we're seeing on the Wilson side of it is the downward turn in the commercial districts with the mall, the restaurants, and so forth. It is unlikely that we will make up the balance of to come up to 9,000 with the remaining months. If we look to both 2019 and 2020, the amount collected in September through December is really limited to any delinquent taxes, people who are paying late, or new businesses. So it is unlikely that we will make up the difference between the 819,000 of Wilson taxes up to the 900 that had been budgeted. But we are over with Wyomissing because of the economic growth. Make sense with mercantile tax?
Yep.
The other tax we've been watching is the local services tax. All right. For the month of August, collections totaled $47,000, bringing the year-to-date total to $324,000, and it would appear as if we were $103,000 behind. However, there is a change in 2020 as a result of the EIT distribution schedule. I've already received August collections in the first week of September. Those collections totaled $101,000. So at the end of September, we'll only be $2,000 behind. So a significant improvement there. And that's indicative of the number of bodies that are in the workforce. So we are returning to pre-pandemic figures there. So that was a nice improvement. All right, any questions on the revenues or the local taxes? Okay. All right, recap of the 4th Street extension. During the month of August, council approved and payment was made on application number 9 in the amount of $517,000. As I stated before, that pending receipt, most of it was received on September 1st. Also during the month of August, application number 10 was received, which was worked through the end of July. That brought the project to 99% complete with a 5% retainer. The infrastructure committee approved payment of $104,000. That is pending council approval at next week's meeting. Just received yesterday, or Tuesday, was application 11, which is the final application on that project, bringing the project to 100% complete with no retainer. An additional payment of $91,000 is pending infrastructure committee approval at its meeting on the 27th. When that is completed, paid, and I have a canceled check, submit all those final expenses for final reimbursement from DCE.
Okay.
That is likely later in October.
To do everything in our power to get that money in by the end of the calendar year.
As soon as the check clears, it's submitted.
Yeah, and I mean, reimbursement on their end is a couple of days.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, the payment for number 9, as you can see, was made on August 19th, and the money was received on September 1st.
Great.
All right, the first application has been received on the 2021 street project from H&K Group. That was basically for the curb work on Hill Avenue. So application number 1 brought the project to about 40% complete with a 10% retainer. The infrastructure committee did make approval on application number 1. However, we learned that there was incorrect quantities in that first application. A revised application has been received and at a lower amount of $136,000 versus I think $164,000 had been approved by the infrastructure committee. But the actual application is only $136,000, so that is pending council approval at Tuesday's meeting. The third and final application has been received on the 2020 sewer work for Mr. Rehab. That brings the project to completion with no retainer. The final payment due is $25,853, and that is pending infrastructure approval at the 27th meeting. So that project for 2020 came in $42,000 less than the contract, which is good because the 2021 project is $31,000 over. First application has been received from Sewer Specialty Services. Work completed brings the project to 47% complete with a 10% retainer. Application in the amount of $97,445 is pending the infrastructure committee's approval at its August 27th meeting.
So curiosity, no one called it to a virtue? How was that infrastructure?
That was approved before the contract was awarded.
Okay.
All right, right, the total capital expenditures for the month of August were $524,000, primarily that payment of the borrower's application number 9. In addition to that, a light bar was purchased for one of the police vehicles. As John described, those light bars, the equipment doesn't fit as the body's changed, and that had been budgeted for $3,000. The actual replacement cost was $3,400. Also included in the capital expenditures was 4th Street Engineering, no longer passed on to Equus, the amount of $3,106. The costs that are listed on the park improvement line include the additional stone that was needed around the pedestrian bridge, as well as another $100 of the Stonehouse plan. So that project, the Stonehouse project, is actually at like 97% complete, and Jim McCarthy was going to contact them about getting the final plans. So that brings our year-to-date capital expenditures to $2,140,000, or about 48% of the total that had been budgeted. And there you can see some of the large budgeted items, some of which will not occur. You can see the multimodal projects is listed at $530,000. Anything else that's not, oh, the library AC is listed there as well.
Okay,
Any question on progress so far?
all good?
Okay, my next portion is pensions. I think next on the agenda is actually discussion about the library AC.
Okay.
Matt, did you have any information on that?
As been discussed in infrastructure, the library HVAC project received one bid, and that was from Spots Brothers at Schuylkill Haven for $62,700. Their project was budgeted for $30,000. It's been recommended by the engineer to rebid that contract, and to, as indicated in your agenda, to increase the budget amount to $45,000 to $30,000 due to material inflation costs that are out there now because of the pandemic and trying to get materials. And if finance is okay with it, we'd like to move this to rebid this on council approval on the 14th of September at the council meeting. And with that, with the approval of council on the 14th, the bid opening would be October 21st with a completion date of May of 2022. Some of the issues that we felt was not getting enough vendors was the completion time that was on the requirement. The completion of the contract was very short. The engineer thought we moved that out a little bit. We think more responsible vendors for stuff like that.
It's a big inflation cost for materials. All right, so we need to approve, rebidding the library HVAC system. You wanna make that motion?
Second.
Okay.
That also include increasing the budget.
Okay, well, that we can, I know we can do this, okay, and then we're also increasing the budget to $45,000, or making it a $45,000 item in the 2022 budget. Do you agree with that, or for
Carrying over the 30,000, right?
Right.
That should count.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
All right, third quarter MMO.
All right, keeping with schedule, the gap between the MMO and the estimated state aid results in 4 quarterly payments. We typically make that before the end of September. So I'm looking for approval to make the 3rd quarter MMO for both the police and the non-uniform plan, totaling $181,000. State aid is anticipated by the end of the month. Last year's state aid was actually received on September 29th. So we will know before going into the 4th quarter, the actual unit value that will be assigned to the 80 units that have been certified. And then we'll compare that amount of state aid to the MMO, and we can adjust the 4th quarter contribution accordingly.
Okay, so we need a motion to pay the third quarter MMO of $181,100 Okay.
Item number 8 is actually the 2022
I'm
MMO.
seeing the same three things.
Go ahead. Great.
All right, the MMO is prepared from current year payroll estimates. Those calculations were made, submitted to Gerard for review, and these are the results. Police at 303, non-uniform defined benefit at 248,000, non-uniform defined contribution at 54,000, fire defined benefit at 97,000, fire defined contribution at 39,000, for a total MMO of $778,498, compared to the 2021 of $1,191,091. Steve, Keith, to answer your questions, I have some comparisons here as to how the information that's derived from the 2021 Act 205 report produced different results. These reports were prepared with their updated mortality table. The long-term interest rate was reduced from 7.5% to 7%, and the salary scale was reduced from 4.5% to 4%. So using those factors, the Act 205 report for the police resulted in a change in that normal cost percentage from 13.34% to 17.32%. That percent is applied to the estimated payroll. The estimated payroll was based on year-to-date payroll through August 12th. And then I go through a calculation that projected payroll through the end of the year for all eligible participants. And that gives us the normal cost. To that amount, amortization is added, also derived from the Act 205 report. So the amortization in 2021 was $589,000, which was reflective of the fact that the market value at the time of the valuation was so low. So the unfunded portion at that time was large. Better results when the market value was measured on January 1st of 2021, the amortization amount dropped to just $42,000. When that $42,000 is added to $367,000, the financial requirement of the plan reduced from $858,000 to $409,000. So a significant reduction there due to the market value and the new factors that had been applied. For the police, they do contribute 5%. That reduces our financial requirement by $106,000, leaving a police MMO of $303,663. The active members in each of the plans has grown as members of the drop program, which are not included in this calculation, have been replaced by newer, younger officers. So that's the police portion. The next is the,
Great, exhale.
the next is the non-uniform defined benefit program. That percent dropped from 10.35% to 9.45%. Applied to estimated payroll, the normal cost decreased from $143,000 to $127,000. There is an amortization amount added of $156,000, bringing the total non-uniform defined benefit program to $284,000. And you can see that the active members will start to drop as retired individuals are replaced by newer staff that are going to be under the defined contribution plan. So that number will continue to drop as individuals retire from that plan.
Fantastic.
This is the defined benefit portion of the non-uniform plan. Always a 10% contribution added or applied to estimated payroll, and those numbers are increasing as new hires come on board. So that payroll number will continue to escalate, leaving an estimated cost for the non-uniform defined contribution plan of $54,519. Next is the firefighters. The firefighters percent dropped from increased from 8.2 to 10.65. As they age, the cost will increase. Applied to estimated payroll, leaves a normal cost of $55,995. The amortization is $41,000, bringing a total financial requirement of the plan $97,111 for the firefighters. The same 5 employees remain on the plan. The defined contribution for the firefighters, the same 4 individuals. This is not a coincidence that the payroll changed literally by $11. When I put this comparison together, I thought it was a mistake. What I found out that year-to-date payroll through August 12th, when I compared 2020 to 2021, was literally different by $262. I used estimates of how much overtime will be worked through the end of the year based on the overtime that was worked last year. I know what longevity payments are coming due. I also factored in the fact that 3 of the firefighters are now at a higher rate because they're technicians. All those factors yielded an $11 difference in the estimated payroll. So that's telling me that the 2021, the individuals were working at a higher rate, but there was less overtime work that offset that higher rate. So not a coincidence, these are actual numbers, with the payroll estimate being the same, and applying 10%, the MMO actually increased $1 to $39,142. So that takes us back to the summary. That a motion is required, if you agree with these numbers, to recommend to council the MMO for 2022 so that it can be included in the budget.
Any other questions? Okay, so we need a motion to approve the MMO for 2022 budget process of $778,498.
I'll second.
Question?
What we made.
Well, you made the motion?
Yeah, so moved.
Oh, that was your fault.
I had a
That was your
verbal-
fault. You're making the motion.
That's
Right,
right,
the motion
second.
with
passion.
My
That's about
apologies.
it.
My apologies.
That's okay.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Yay, us.
All right.
All right, moving on. Oak Tree outdoor advertising
Devin Wagner from Oak Tree Advertising attended the Economic Development Committee meeting 2 weeks ago. Steve and Tom, I believe you were the only 2, and Jody, who were not at that meeting, to see the presentation.
proposal. You did send this to me.
Yes. The very short version is Oak Tree is looking into placing a billboard on borough-owned property that is right off of the North Wyomissing Boulevard exit onto the highway. Obviously, they would need to enter a lease with the borough since we do own the property. Zoning permits it by right. That property is zoned in the I2 zoning district where outdoor advertising is permitted by right. It meets all the other requirements of the zoning ordinance. It does sound like there's some work they're gonna need to do with PennDOT in terms of PennDOT's requirements for access to the site, which they've had to work through that issue with PennDOT before and did not seem overly concerned about getting the approval to do that.
Seems to come under the category of too good to be true.
Amen.
Yeah. I think the question we had for Chris was whether this contract and expenditures are in line with other contracts.
Yeah, I reviewed, the contract I did with Lamar for an electronic sign on another state highway that, has less traffic than this road does, but I think, the structure is similar. But the difference is that I wanted to point out to the committee, proposal that we have in front of us is for essentially a 30-year contract. And the payments that are proposed are to have a base rent and payment of 20% of collected revenue, and whichever is greater of those two amounts will be what we actually receive. And we're focusing on the base rent, which is what is assured that we would receive. The escalations on that would be after the first 10 years at the base rent amount, you get a 10% escalation for the second 10-year period. And then if they exercise renewal options they have for years 20 to 25 and 26 to 30, you would have 10% for that second 10-year period. So essentially you get base rent for 10 years, a 10% escalation for 11 through 20, and a 10% escalation for 21 through 30. The other lease that I have with Lamar, we have a base rent for the first 5 years, and then a 15% escalation for 6 through 10, and then another escalation of 15% for 11 through 15. The consequences of the longer lease term and the lower escalation rates are that you get less increase over time. If you have a shorter lease term, for example, 15 years rather than 30 years, you have the opportunity to reset the economics of the transaction. In my experience with billboard leases, there was only one period of time, maybe 20 years ago, when the rents actually went down. Generally speaking, the rents have almost always gone up. So if we had a shorter lease term, say 15 rather than 30 years, I think the ability to reset the rent would likely benefit the borough. So that's one thing to consider. The other factor that I mentioned, the escalation rates, again, I think what is proposed is less than what I have been able to get for, with Lamar in other leases. And again, that eventually means you get more money. So I guess what I would propose to the committee is that you authorize me to try to negotiate at least on the escalation. I think on the term, I also think that it would be beneficial to be shorter in terms of the length of the lease, but I'd like to get some feedback from you as to how comfortable you are in taking the risk that the market will not increase the value of the lease after the initial, say, 15-year period.
I think you'll have trouble getting them to go less here. I just think their capital expenditure spreading out the business model makes it much more lucrative for them to spread the cost out over those 30 years with a guarantee. My feeling would be you probably have a better chance of increasing that escalation of the rate as opposed to the term.
Plus, I think also, at John's meeting, it wasn't really guaranteed that they're gonna get PennDOT's approval. They have a bunch of hoops to jump through, even to get to that point, if I recall. And although they didn't think it was an impossibility, but this is a long way to go.
At the same time.
And they'll have more expensive that too.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. With this other lease, they had to go through the Commonwealth Court to get zoning approval for this. It took them about 5 years to get this billboard approved. And they also had, substantial capital expenditures. I mean, I agree, probably, because this lease that I'm looking at is probably 8 years old. I'm sure those costs are higher now than they were 8 years ago. And it's a big signing.
I just think it's at the end of the day, it's a great deal for the borough. I mean, that it's all found money, but that land is totally never going to be used for anything else. Has no resale value and isn't going to be used for anything. But at the same time, we want to make sure we get the best deal possible.
Right. Well, is the committee on board with Keith's suggestion on the
Well, I'd floated both out there. I mean, in terms of negotiation, I think I'd float out there a shorter term and an increase in the escalation. And at the end of the day, if you can get them to agree to an escalation, that would be okay with that.
Makes sense. All right, I will proceed accordingly. Thank you.
But don't let them walk away.
That's too hard.
I don't think that's good.
All right, good. That's what that was for. All right, fire department FEMA grant expenditures.
Chief Hackman brought this up to the Fire and Police Committee. Basically, the joint fire department, Wyomissing applied for a federal emergency management agency grant and received that grant for $69,953. Wyomissing portion of the grant is $39,869, to which we wish to purchase 3 hydraulic rescue tools to use by the fire department at a cost of $30,670. There is a no match grant. Basically, it's a paid for grant, and we reimburse the cost.
Just for my edification, can you tell me what these things are, what, on the,
Water extrication.
so it's spread, like, spreading things apart?
Just
is
the
it?
jaws
Jaws of life,
life,
all kinds of stuff, okay.
spreaders.
All right.
Body work tool.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
So we,
With the Wyomissing grant, there's an additional $9,800 that's also available for use. The chief would then take the extra money and use the recommended guidelines from the FEMA list as what they can purchase for that. And that would also be a total pass for the rest of that. So basically, in a nutshell, is permission to spend the money and get reimbursed at the cost of the work.
okay, let's go back, my computer's not working, I don't know what that number was yet. Sure with that, so we need, go ahead, Pat.
To accept and expend the amount of $39,869, which is the borough's cost. The current tools are $30,670, so I don't know if you can accept all of it, it's $30,000.
The whole grant's 39.
Correct.
Yeah, it's free money.
So, yeah.
So, let them expend up to the grant amount. Okay,
Okay.
so we need a motion to that effect.
So,
Second? Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? We'll take free money. Motion carries. Okay. And we've already done the 5-year vehicle replacement plan. Any old business?
I have one thing. I had brought up at last month's finance meeting that Melissa and I were working with Visual Sound to obtain a quote to get audiovisual equipment for this room to be able to hold hybrid meetings. That quote finally came in at a cost of approximately $50,000.
How many thousand?
50. I've since found a company called Logitech that seems to offer similar equipment at a significantly reduced cost. Melissa and I had a Zoom meeting with them yesterday to effectively get walked through all of the pieces of the package that the borough would potentially purchase, see how everything works. We had a representative from Stratix on the call, who's our IT company, just to make sure they were aware of anything that technologically went over Melissa and my head. That Stratix rep actually followed up with both of us after that call to say that he's worked with Logitech equipment for several years, is extremely comfortable with it. We do potentially have some cabling concerns. It would not look as sleek and pretty as the $50,000 visual sound option, but I think with some wire mold and other, creative housekeeping, we could get it to look nice in here. So I have a call later this morning to follow up with the tech from Logitech to talk budget numbers, get a hard copy quote from them, and then I will give that to Phyllis if the committee's in favor of it to include in the first round of budget.
Yeah, that's where it should go. It should go to the budget and then
See where it goes from there.
see where.
Go for it.
It's just gonna go in the budget. It'll get approved in the budget.
Yeah, keep going through the Logitech Any new business? Hearing none, I don't see anything else at the bottom of that. Or agenda?
Just an update on budget preparation. Worksheets were distributed to department heads last week, with a due date of Wednesday, September 15th, to return the information to me. At that point, I'll begin compiling on the departmental, requests for next year.
And when did we start last year? When did we start the budget?
We started early October. So I don't know if you wanna, include that in our first meeting, or our regularly scheduled budget meeting, or finance committee meeting, or if you wanna start with special budget meetings.
Probably should.
The finance committee meeting in October is early, right? It's obviously gonna be early. Maybe we can include it in the finance committee and have a special meeting a week or two later in October. Get a general feel for it. We're not gonna meet for October. When is the meeting in October? Everybody know? October,
It's like sixth or something.
okay, so we're not gonna meet before the 7th of October.
Yeah, 7.
So let's discuss it at the October meeting and then we'll start doing the special meetings maybe 2 weeks after that.
So Phyllis, the public, you have to have that published by when in November?
It has to be approved by council in November for advertising.
I'm sorry, what was,
So, council, November meeting must approve the proposed
Okay.
budget for
Okay.
advertising
so
Has
that's
to
our
be
goal to get
advertised
to
for
them.
30
You get
days.
it.
and adopted in December.
All right.
And the American Recovery Act money, where we at, anything?
I've been told that final guidelines aren't gonna be released until the end of this month or October. Phyllis does have a report she has to file in October. I don't think she's gonna say much of anything.
It's just incredible.
So I mean, does it look like we're gonna be able to use it to fix roads?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Infrastructure is definitively included.
Okay.
You always have the option to use it to replace lost revenue during 2020.
Right.
And then the money can free up fund balance to be spent without all the restrictions.
Do we have an estimate, maybe as part of the process, maybe for budgeting, maybe we can get an estimate for what that might be?
I do.
What you think you can
we-
justify as
yeah,
lost revenue?
We had original estimates, we were waiting for guidelines as to what could be included and what required to be excluded. Specifically, we lost of interest income. I personally attribute to the pandemic, that in the current regulations, that doesn't seem to be a qualified category.
It does not,
No.
you know, I would think they're not gonna live that. But I think what we need to do as part of the budgeting process is say, all right, how much can we legitimately say we can use for lost revenue and put back into the general account to distribute to other projects, but then take the balance and just put it into infrastructure roads. I mean, that's where we've held back on roads for so long. We're gonna have to bite the bullet at some point, and we may as well use that money as much as possible, plus whatever we have left, you know, we'll have to do.
We'll have to budget for the additional payment too, the second year's payment.
To the extent possible,
Correct.
if we use it to replace lost revenue, that would be considered as spent during the current year. And then anything not used would go forward, the deferred income for the current year will be current income when it's actually spent. And what we wanna be watchful of is the amount of federal funds that are actually spent, opening it up to requirements for a single audit, which is a much more expensive process.
Do you think they'll do an audit for each of the distributions, or you think it'll be one audit for both
Well,
distributions?
there's reports that will be submitted on a cycle evidencing what you've spent. I'm sure those reports will be subject to audit.
But I think that's a good point though, because next June, we're gonna get
another check.
We're gonna get another check, so we could potentially budget some of that for roads and infrastructure for the end of next year.
Correct.
Which is when they end up getting done usually the third and fourth quarter anyway, right?
And you see the timing of the payments?
Jim is also looking at some potential work for student pumping stations that fall into that infrastructure.
Well, I guess we just have to tell Jim that to put together the far out wish list. and then pare it down from there based on.
I think
There's
the
some roads that
committee
could
does
use
have an
paving, right?
extensive list for next year.
Based off of our meeting yesterday, I think he already has that list prepared.
Perfect. So yeah, we have to be cognizant of not only spending this 500 some odd thousand, but the next 500 some odd thousand. we gotta
I think we should be able to do that, Greg, without a tax increase.
I'm in.
spend. 18.
I'm in. Should I start getting high fives now, or am I should I wait a little while?
All right, anything else under new business? Going once, hearing none, meeting is adjourned.
All right.